hard winter wind under a lonely cabin. A man who had buried every gentle part of himself thought hunger was the only thing left that could make him ask for help. So in the last week of January, when the drifts were higher than his fences and the smoke from his chimney crawled sideways in the wind, Elias Rowe nailed a crooked board to the gatepost of his Montana ranch. Cook wanted. Wages and a bed. No questions. Beat, he had written the words with lampblack and a shaking hand, then hated himself for the shaking. The notice looked foolish out there, half swallowed by snow, facing a trail that no decent traveler would take until spring. But Elias had eaten scorched beans for 3 nights, sour biscuits for 2, and salted beef so hard it had cracked one of his molars. A man could turn his back on church bells, neighbors, letters, and memory. Small pause he could not turn his back forever on a stomach that hurt like a fist. The Rowe place sat in a high basin north of the Bitter Root, where winter did not fall so much as occupy. The cabin was built of dark pine and old stubbornness. The barn leaned against the weather like an exhausted animal. Behind both, mountains rose black and white under a lid of cloud, holding the whole valley in a silence, so complete it seemed sinful to break it. For almost 3 years, Elias had allowed that silence to keep him. He had not replaced the blue curtain his wife Ruth had sewn for the kitchen window. He had not moved the little cradle from the corner, though no child had slept in it since the fever took Clara before her first birthday. He had not let another soul sit at his table. He wanted a cook, he told himself. Not company, not mercy, just someone to keep a pot from burning while he worked himself numb. By dusk, the sign had already grown a white beard of frost. Elias stood on the porch with his coat collar turned up, watching the trail disappear in blown powder. He was about to go inside when he saw a color that did not belong to winter. Quiet beat. At first it was only a stain moving between the cottonwoods, a dull red flicker against the white. Then it became a human shape, small, slow, upright only by force of will. A woman was walking toward his gate. She wore no coat. Under it, Elias saw a red silk jacket faded almost to rust, the kind of garment that must have crossed an ocean before it crossed this valley. Her hair was black and pinned badly at the back of her head. Her face had the grayish calm of someone past fear, and beneath the hem of her dark skirt, her feet were bare. Paws, not poorly shod, not wrapped. Bare, the snow had taken the color from them. The trail behind her was marked in small red commas where the crust had cut her skin. She stopped before the board. Her eyes moved across the words once, then again. Elias did not know whether she could read them. He did know she was Chinese, and he knew what that could mean in a mining country where men wanted labor they could underpay. Blame, use, and throw away. Trouble, his mind said. Trouble with frostbitten feet, trouble with a face too young for all that distance. Trouble that would sit in Ruth's chair, breathe in Ruth's room, and wake the dead things he had worked so hard to keep buried. He stepped down from the porch, meaning to say there was no work after all, meaning to say the road south might lead her to a settlement, meaning to say anything that kept the wall around him standing. Then the woman lifted one foot from the snow, and for half a second he saw the soul of it. Slowly raw split, still moving. Elias felt something in him give way with a soundless crack. "Come in," he said. SFX. Cabin door opens, wind rushes, then shuts. The woman did not answer. She only looked at him, as if weighing whether one more door in the world could be trusted. Then she crossed the yard with the slow precision of a person who had already spent the last of her strength and was borrowing from tomorrow. Inside, the cabin received her like a dark mouth. The air smelled of ash, damp wool, old leather, and food that had failed at becoming food. Elias shut the door fast against the wind. The woman stood on the plank floor and left 2 wet prints that steamed faintly near the stove. He pointed at the iron range. "Sign says cook." It came out harsher than he meant it. He almost hoped she would shake her head. Then he could give her a blanket, let her warm, and send her away before she became a responsibility with a name. Instead, she looked at the stove, the table, the flour barrel, the crock of beans, the onions hanging in a net from the rafters, and the slab of smoke, dark beef on its hook. Her gaze moved quickly, taking inventory like a person reading a map, Then she nodded once. SFX. Stove door clanked softly. Her hands were swollen with cold, but she moved them with care. She washed them in water that made her breath catch, yet she made no complaint. From the torn lining of her jacket she drew a little bone, handled knife, hardly longer than a finger. With it she shaved the beef thin, cut 2 onions, and scraped the worst black crust from the pan Elias had nearly ruined the night before. He sat by the hearth and watched as if watching witchcraft. She used bean liquor he would have thrown out. She tore yesterday's biscuits into pieces, browned them in fat, and stirred them into a stew until the whole room changed. Not warmed. Changed the cabin, which had spent years smelling like a man enduring his own punishment, began to smell of pepper, smoke, onion, and patience. The first spoonful did not taste like anything grand. It tasted like survival made kind. Heat spread through his chest, into the hollows under his ribs, into places he had forgotten a body could feel. He finished the bowl, then a second, and only when he reached for a third did he realize she had not served herself. He looked toward the empty chair across from him. Ruth's chair. Low pause for 3 years. Elias had left it exactly where she had last pushed it back from the table. Nobody sat there. Not even him. He filled another bowl and set it across from himself. The woman stayed by the stove. Food's wages too, he said, not looking at the chair. After a long moment she came and sat on the very edge, light as a bird on a rail. She held the spoon awkwardly at first, then hunger took over, and she ate with the fierce concentration of someone who had learned that manners did not matter if you died polite. That night, after she slept curled beside the stove in a blanket that smelled of cedar shavings, Elias opened Ruth's trunk. SFX old trunk lid creaks. He told himself he was looking for something practical. He found the boots first. Brown leather, wool, lined, cracked along one seam, but still strong. Ruth had worn them the winter Clara was born. Elias held them until the memory burned his palms. In the morning the boots stood by the stove. He said nothing about them. Neither did she, but she put them on. They were far too large. She stuffed the toes with strips torn from an old feed sack and moved through the cabin with a soft, uneven thump. The sound irritated Elias for the first hour. By the second day, he listened for it when he came in from the barn. Her name came on the 3rd morning. He had returned before sunrise with his beard iced white and his fingers numb inside his gloves. On the table, beside a cup of coffee, the woman had drawn 2 marks in a dusting of flour. May, she pointed to herself. May, she said. Elias gave his own name, and it felt strange in his mouth, as if it belonged to someone who had gone missing. The arrangement should have remained simple. Work for shelter, meals for wages, no questions. But quiet people still change a house. May cleaned the kitchen window until the winter light entered in a pale square. She tied dried sage and mint in small bundles and hung them near the stove. She mended the torn sleeve of Elias's coat with stitches, so small he had to hold the cloth near the lamp to see them. She saved onion skins for broth, coffee grounds for the icy path, bacon fat for cornbread, and every bent nail that could be straightened and used again. She never moved Ruth's cradle. Softly, that, more than any courtesy, made Elias trust her. She seemed to understand that some objects were not clutter. They were borders around a wound. The meals changed too. It smelled of yeast, soap, firewood, and something dangerous. Beat a future. SFX, sudden storm impact against cabin walls. The storm struck near midnight. Wind slammed into the cabin so hard the walls groaned. Snow hissed through every gap. The barn vanished by morning. The world outside the window became a white violence, churning and blind. For 2 days, Elias and May kept the fire alive. He chopped kindling from a broken chair. Neither slept long. The storm's voice filled every hour, a screaming so constant that even silence would have sounded strange. On the 3rd night the temperature dropped low enough to frost the inside of the window. Elias woke in his chair and saw May sitting upright near the stove, wrapped in her shawl, shivering with her jaw locked tight. Ruth's boots lay beside her, dark with melted snow. She had been drying them for the morning, though there was nowhere to go. He took the buffalo robe from his own bunk and crossed the room. She watched him with wary eyes. He set the robe around her shoulders and stepped back before she could think she owed him anything. "It ain't charity," he muttered. "Dead cooks are poor workers." For a moment May only looked at him. Then she laughed. Small surprised breath. It was not much. A broken breath, really. But it startled the cabin. It startled Elias. Most of all. Something loosened after that. Near dawn, while the storm hammered the roof, May began to hum. The tune was low and narrow, hardly more than breath. Elias did not know the language of it, but he knew what grief sounded like when it tried not to be heard. He had made that sound without music for 3 years. He did not ask her to stop. He did not ask what the song meant. He only sat on the far side of the hearth and kept the fire fed. When the storm ended, the door opened onto a world remade. The yard had disappeared under sculpted drifts. The gatepost was nearly buried. Only the top of the crooked sign showed above the snow. The word "cook half," visible, as if the mountain itself had tried to hide the invitation that had changed everything. May brought Elias coffee while he cleared a path to the barn. She wore Ruth's boots, the buffalo robe over her shoulders, and a strip of red silk tied around one wrist where her sleeve had finally torn beyond mending. "Thank you," she said. 2 words. Simple, unearned, Elias thought. Yet they landed in him like warm bread in an empty hand. He nodded because he did not trust his voice. The peace lasted 9 days. On the 10th, 3 riders came out of the North Timber. SFX, distant horse hooves in snow. Elias saw them while splitting wood. They rode slowly, not because the trail was hard, but because men who expect fear seldom hurry. One wore a black hat with a silver concho. One had a yellow scarf pulled high over his mouth. The third LED a spare horse with an empty saddle. May saw them from the window. SFX, cup drops and breaks. The cup in her hand slipped and broke on the floor. Elias did not move toward her. That would have told the riders too much. He simply set the axe against the chopping block and walked to the porch. The man in the black hat reined up first. His eyes found May behind the glass and stayed there. "Afternoon," he called. "We're looking for a woman wandered off from a placer camp near Cedar Gulch." Elias said nothing. "Chinese," the man continued. "Small, red jacket. Answers to whatever name you give her if she wants to eat." The yellow-scarfed rider laughed. May had gone utterly still inside the cabin. The man in the black hat smiled like he owned the snow under his horse. "No trouble intended. She owes labor to a contract. We brought a horse to carry her back." Elias's right hand hung loose beside his thigh. He had spent years teaching that hand not to remember. Low pause. It remembered anyway. "No contracts on this place," he said. The rider's smile thinned. "Mister, you don't know what she is." Elias looked through the window once. May stood in the dim cabin. One hand pressed to the table, the other closed around the strip of red silk on her wrist. Her face was not helpless, that mattered. She was afraid, yes, but she was not asking him to decide whether she was human. She had already decided. Elias turned back to the rider. "I know what you are." The yellow-scarfed man swung down from his saddle. His hand went toward his pistol. Not all the way, just enough to make a show of it. Elias stepped off the porch. The movement was small. The change in him was not. The hollow rancher vanished. In his place stood the man who had once guarded gold wagons through canyon country, who had learned where violence began in a shoulder, an elbow, a blink. The man he had buried with Ruth and Clara rose behind his eyes like a black door opening. "Get back on your horse," Elias said. The rider stopped. Nobody spoke for a moment. SFX, loose shutter tapping in wind. The only sound was a loose shutter tapping against the cabin wall. The man in the black hat studied Elias's face. Whatever he saw there cost him his certainty. Men like him were brave only when the world agreed with them. This valley had stopped agreeing. "You're making yourself responsible," he said. "I already did." The words surprised Elias. They seemed to surprise May too. The riders left in a dirty spray of snow, but their threat did not leave with them. It stayed in the yard, in the hoofprints, in the shattered cup on the cabin floor. Elias remained outside until his fingers ached. When he came in, May was kneeling with a rag, gathering the white shards. "You should go," he said. She looked up. He hated the fear in his own voice more than he hated any fear he had seen in hers. "They'll come back with more men, or a paper, or a rope. I can't promise this place is safe." May put the broken cup pieces on the table. "No place was safe," she said. "I came anyway." Elias turned away, but there was nowhere far enough inside that small room to hide from truth. He told her then, not all at once, not cleanly. The words came like stones dug out of frozen ground. Ruth Clara, the fever that took the baby first, and Ruth after 5 days of singing to an empty cradle. The doctor who arrived too late because Elias had been away escorting a payroll wagon through a pass no one else would ride. The guilt that made every dollar he had earned feel like blood money. The gun he had sold, the ranch he had bought at the far edge of everything. The promise he made to never again be the sort of man people came to when danger needed answering. May listened without touching him. When he finished, she took his hand and turned it palm up. Elias realized one knuckle was split where he had gripped the axe handle too hard. She cleaned it with warm water. Her fingers were steady. "They sold my brother first," she said. "Then my mother stopped speaking. Then I was put on a ship with a paper I could not read. In Cedar Gulch, they said I owed for passage, for food, for the roof over my head. The debt grew every week. When a cook died in the camp, they put me in her place." Slow pause. She wrapped a strip of cloth around his knuckle. "I ran when the snow started because tracks disappear in weather." Elias stared at the little white bandage on his hand. "How long did you walk?" May's mouth tightened, not quite a smile. "Long enough to answer your sign." Outside, the wind shifted. Inside, something heavier shifted with it. After that night, the cabin stopped being his shelter and her refuge. It became a thing they guarded together. Elias moved the table away from the window so May would not be framed there for any rider passing the gate. He loaded the old shotgun he had sworn never to use and kept it above the door, not as a threat to the room but as a promise to the world outside it. May boiled willow bark for pain, packed food in small cloth bundles in case they had to run, and hid a knife behind the flour barrel where her hand could find it in the dark. Yet fear did not take back the whole house in the mornings. She still made coffee at dusk. He still brought wood. She taught him to fold dumplings with his thick fingers, and he ruined half of them before she smiled and corrected his thumb. He showed her which clouds meant dry cold and which meant snow, which creek ice could carry a man and which would murder him politely. Sometimes they spoke of nothing important simply because they could. The thaw began with dripping. SFX, slow meltwater, dripping from eaves. At first it was only the eaves, one slow drop at a time. Then the path to the barn turned brown in the middle. Then the creek under the cottonwoods broke open and ran silver over black stones. The world did not become kind. It became possible one afternoon. Elias found May outside the gate. For one terrible second he thought she was leaving. Then he saw what she was doing. The crooked sign had come free as the snow sank. May had pulled it from the mud. She brushed the old lampblack words with her sleeve until Cook wanted showed again, faint and foolish under all that weather. Elias stood beside her. "Guess I should burn it," he said. May studied the board. "Why, jobs filled." She looked at him then, and there was spring light on her face. "No," she said. It was answered. Pause the difference struck him so hard he had no reply. Together they carried the board to the cabin. Elias expected her to set it by the woodpile, but Matey took it inside and leaned it near the hearth. Behind the cradle, where the words could not be seen from the room, unless a person knew to look. That evening she cooked fresh creek trout in cornmeal and the last of the winter onions. Elias repaired the blue curtain for the kitchen window, clumsy stitches and all. When he hung it, the cloth stirred in the warm draught from the stove, like something breathing again. Weeks passed. No riders came. The garden went in near the south wall of the cabin. May planted beans, onion ends, and seeds. She had carried in a paper packet sewn into the hem of her skirt. Elias turned the soil for her, black and wet and full of the clean smell of beginnings. His hands, once useful, mostly for breaking, learned the weight of gentler work. The first green shoots appeared after a warm rain. May knelt beside them barefoot. Her feet had healed with pale scars across the soles. Elias noticed them and felt the old anger rise, then settle into something steadier than anger. Witness, maybe. A vow that did not need to be spoken loudly to be kept. He brought Ruth's boots to the porch and set them beside her. Maidie touched the cracked leather, then looked at the new grass under her toes. "Not today," she said. Elias nodded. He understood. A person who had crossed death barefoot might need to feel the living earth answer back. At sunset they sat on the porch while the mountains turned purple and gold. The ranch no longer looked like an exile. Smoke lifted straight from the chimney. The garden held its small green argument against every winter that had tried to bury them. From inside the cabin came the faint smell of bread cooling on the table. Elias looked at May's hand resting on the step between them. He did not grab it. Men who had lost too much sometimes mistook wanting for permission. Instead, he laid his own hand nearby, palm open. May looked down. Slowly she placed her hand in his. Soft landing. Neither of them spoke. The valley did not need more words. It had heard enough pleading, enough bargaining, enough wind. The crooked board behind the cradle still carried its 3 plain lines. Cook wanted wages and a bed. No questions. Elias had meant them as a bargain against hunger. But the woman who crossed the snow had read them differently. She had read them as a door. She had stepped through with bleeding feet, a hidden knife, a packet of seeds, and a grief as deep as his own, and by answering a sign nailed into frozen ground, she had taught a dead house how to become a home.